All right, we are ready to go. Thanks for joining us today for this Scotch Talk from the Center for Civil Society. I just got my first reminder that I need to turn off my email so it's not making those noises as we go forward. Um, Glad to have you with us today, and also glad to have a number of panelists with us whom I will introduce here shortly. My name is Jeremy Beer. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Civil Society. I am the co-founder and executive chairman at AmPhil, um, out of which the Center for Civil Society sprung earlier this year. So happy to have you with us for this Scotch Talk called Getting Your Foot in the Door: How to Successfully Engage Your Foundation Prospects. So we call these things Scotch Talks because they are meant to be like an informal conversation you might have over a glass of Scotch. So the idea is that perhaps you're having a Scotch along with us. Usually, most people aren't because it's early in the day on a weekday. However, today I am having an Irish whiskey, even though it is 1 o'clock in Phoenix, Arizona, where I am. But we're having our Christmas party shortly after this Scotch talk ends, so I feel justified in doing that. So please don't think I have a problem. There's no need to call the authorities or my wife. We're good. So let's get going. If you are here live, let us know in the chat. We would love to know. This is our usual practice. Who's with us and who you're with, or organization you work for. That sometimes helps us tailor our responses and questions to your situation. Also, feel free to start putting questions for us in the chat or in the Q&A feature. We'll try to monitor both of those things. Sometimes the chat, it can get lost, so the Q&A feature is probably the best one to use. Um, so we'd love for you to do that. This is very participatory. I mean, you don't have to uh, participate, but it's nice if you do. We'd love to get a question from you. I've got a list of questions for our esteemed panelists here, but if we don't get through all of them, it's okay. None of us are going to weep. So, all right, with that, let me introduce my panelists here today for this Scotch Talk on how to successfully engage your foundation prospects. Um, at the top left of my screen, I don't know if this is the case for everybody, is Allison Rigterink. Allison comes to us from Midland, Michigan, where right now she said, is it the wind chill that's -2 or the actual temperature, air temp?
Wind chill, thankfully.
All right. Nevertheless, we have a sub-zero wind chill. That's pretty good. Allison is a senior consultant with AmPhil. And I will say, like Siobhan and James, Allison, all of them, what you're thinking maybe is like, wow, these are like good-looking young people. And it's true. They are. They're very young to me. They're also very, very experienced in reaching out to foundations, not only from the work they've been doing here at AmPhil for the last few years, but also from their previous stops. So they'll have a lot of wisdom to share with us. All right, so that's Allison. To my bottom left is James Davenport. He is a director with AmPhil and runs a group for us out of our Conshohocken office in Philadelphia. Lives in a little place called Bridgeport, Pennsylvania. What's the temp there today, James?
Oh, it's probably 55. It's not bad here right
Oh,
now.
well, yeah, it's not even worth mentioning.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have even have asked. And finally, Siobhan Walter, who is a managing consultant with AmPhil and is speaking to us from Renton, Washington, which is a suburb of Seattle to the south of Seattle. Am I
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Ish?
Southeast. Yeah.
Southeast? Okay. And is it raining?
Yeah, I think, well, might not be raining at the moment, but it was raining earlier. It's like 45, so
Just it's kind of
yeah.
always
Like kind of
raining or
just
might rain
standard.
in Seattle,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Or gray.
So it's not everybody's cup of tea. So, but we're glad to have Siobhan. It is Siobhan's cup of tea, and we're happy to have her with us. So, let's get started. Talking about sometimes we do these Scotch talks, and it's a little bit of a more general topic like foundations, but um, sometimes that is not as useful as when we really kind of narrow it down. And I like that we've narrowed it down here today to talking just about how do you get your foot in the door, how to engage your foundation prospects. So, um, let's start, Siobhan, with you and ask a preliminary question, which we sometimes get from clients, and it's a reasonable question to ask. And it's this: is this even worth it? Is applying for foundation grants worth it? Aren't we better off um, just sticking to individual donors? And there's a lot of rigmarole that comes with applying for foundation support. You can take us through maybe some of the other kind of challenges there, but is this worth it?
Yes, short answer is absolutely. Foundations are 100% worth it. But this is a question we get all the time, right? Why not pour my time and energy and resources into reaching out to individuals? I could meet with someone today and ask for $100,000 and maybe come back with a check, right? That's not necessarily the way it works with foundations, but there are currently over 86,000 private foundations in the United States. And according to the most recent Giving USA survey, last year, 19% of charitable dollars came from foundations. So yes, if you don't have a foundation program, you're missing out on a lot of potential revenue and really loyal, good donors. I think, like you said, Jeremy, it's a process. There's often staff, there are deadlines, requirements. You have to actually write a proposal. It might not be as simple as a meeting. So there's things you have to do, but as long as you're organized and can stay on top of those things, it can be very, very rewarding. So I would say,
I've never seen, you mentioned the foundations tend to be loyal. I think that's true. I've actually never seen a data point on like foundation retention rate. We know that like individual donor retention rates are what, 40-ish% or something is I think the overall across all nonprofits number is really bad. I mean, it seems bad to us in the industry here who are not in the business of losing donors. But for foundations, it seems like it's considerably higher than that, right, Siobhan? Do we
yeah,
know?
I would say so. I don't have
Yeah.
the exact number, but yeah, I would say it's much, much higher. The other thing to keep in mind is that foundations are required to give away money, unlike individuals.
Right.
Every year they have to give away at least 5%. And so, there's sometimes a higher likelihood that you'll get a yes. It can take longer again, and there's more of a process, but just something to keep in mind that there's money out there that has to be given away. So
Yeah. That's 20% of the pie. James, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say two things. Just one on the point of foundation retention. If you just scroll through some 990s of different foundations, you'll see that year over year it doesn't really change that much, right? They're pretty much giving to the same people year over year, especially if they're sort of more of general operating support type foundation, and family foundations especially. The other thing I mentioned, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm getting the stats wrong here, but I think in one of our past fundraising performance surveys, the average, especially among nonprofits that are not getting government support, for how the average of how much of their revenue is coming from foundations is actually a lot higher than 19%, right? It's like
Yeah, in
30.
our survey, which was a particular slice of the nonprofit
Sure.
world, yeah, it was like I want close to 40% maybe of their
Yeah.
total dollars were coming from foundations. So even though it's only 19% across the entire charitable sector, doesn't mean for you or where you're living, it couldn't be maybe a lot higher.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned too, not only is it 19% of the pie now across every kind of nonprofit, and perhaps much higher where your space, whatever space you're operating in. But James, you mentioned a stat about how much it's grown since, in the last
Oh
40
yeah.
years.
Yeah. Like from 1979, the giving from foundations has increased in real dollars about 1,000%. Well, on the individual side, it's only about 140% or something
Hmm.
like that, 135,
Hmm.
which is just an astounding figure.
Right.
But
So a significant piece of the pie, um, easier to retain, and growing.
yeah,
So lots of reasons why, yes, applying for foundations is worth it. Um, and we can talk about some of well, we will be talking about how to overcome some of the challenges that are involved with that. In fact, let's just work to that right now. James. Um, okay, so we've decided, um, maybe even just a ramp up. We've had a program. We'd write grants. We're talking about now about really trying to break through and really ramp that up. How do we? Um, what are some creative ways we can think about in order to break through with new foundation prospects?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, let's just assume that the typical process, right, is you sort of identify a foundation you want to reach out to, you send them an LOI, you do some follow up on that LOI, you get a meeting, you submit a proposal, right? Let's assume that's the normal process. A couple different things that we've done and have had success with. The first one that I'm really, really bullish on is usually I'll do this in sort of Q4, somewhere late October, early November, is do what I call proposal blitz. And so for those foundations that you've reached out to, you send them an LOI, you never heard back, they never picked up your calls, that sort of thing. I'll drop, somewhere between 30 to 50 proposals in the mail, cold proposals with an
I
ask
love
amount,
this.
send them directly to them, and just conduct follow up to them as if it were an LOI, right? So
Mhm.
really aggressive follow up. And you might think like, foundations don't want to just get a proposal in the mail. That's going to annoy them, or they're not going to like that. Now, I would caveat that I wouldn't recommend doing that to a particularly bureaucratic or staffed foundation, right? So
Mhm.
I wouldn't send the Templeton Foundation a proposal blitz, but for those family foundations, I've not only seen it start conversations, start meetings that end up in gifts, but I've also seen foundations literally respond with checks.
Yeah.
So it's really, really worth it. Some other ones that I would just mention briefly, right? LinkedIn, right? If it's a staff foundation and they have program officers or an executive director, that person's probably on LinkedIn. Reach out to them, send them a message, right? Especially if you can find the point of contact you're really trying to meet with. And then also if your board members or your donors have connections to a foundation, right? You might be able to triangulate and get an advocate on the board or an advocate on the staff who can sort of pull your letter out of the stack of letters.
So 3 good creative ways I'm going to review for people here, and then I'm going to have you answer a question from
Yeah.
a guest. Um, the proposal blitz, which you're saying not with necessarily staff foundations who have a very clear process about how they want to be approached, but maybe
Yeah.
ones where it's a little hazier.
Yeah. 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 So especially, oh,
Hmm.
sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
No, that's okay. Good. You can explain. Yeah,
Now, is it when
continue.
especially if you see the title Family Foundation in there, if you go to their 990 and you don't see anyone under that executive staff line where it lists
Hmm.
salaries and all that kind of stuff, if that's not there, right, they're ripe for a proposal blitz. Or if they don't have a website, or if they do have a website, but it's just a sort of, we've all seen these foundation websites, right? Built in the 1990s. It says we support, I don't know, kids in Africa, and then nothing else, right? So if it's something like that, just send them a cold proposal.
Okay, so that's number one, proposal blitz. Number two, LinkedIn. Check LinkedIn to see if you can figure out who is actually making decisions at this
Yeah,
place, right?
making decisions, but also I find this particularly effective when you're looking for advocates to get your LOI into proposal stage,
Yeah.
right? So if you're looking for your program officer who's going to say, "Hey, this one's cool," right? That's kind of the person that I think it works best with on LinkedIn.
Let's halt here and answer the question, which is LOI. What are we talking about?
Yes, letter of inquiry. So this is a, typically 1.5 page letter, never longer than two, certainly, that you're sending to a foundation, giving them sort of an overview, telling them a story about your organization, really trying to capture them, demonstrating that you know a little bit about them, right? Sort of maybe listing some of their past grantees that do similar work to you, and then ultimately requesting to submit a proposal.
Hope that explains that question. If there's more to that question, please let us know in the chat. And then the third thing you mentioned was just looking for connections with among your current major donors and board members,
Yeah.
people who can answer open doors.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially, I mean, if you have a board member on your board who is on the board of a foundation or is connected to a board of a foundation, that can be extremely effective, not only for breaking through, by the way, but also at a later stage for advocating for upgrades or things like that. But
The breaking through up, I'm gonna pause on this moment for a second because the way my own prejudice on this is if you ask board members or donors to make an introduction, sometimes they will, and often they'll say they will and they don't ever get around to it.
yeah,
So you at least have to make it very easy for them to do that, like draft the introductory language for them and land it in their inbox. But when you ask, you might get a no. So sometimes it's best just to go ahead and you've already reached out to the foundation. You know there's a connection between your donor or board member with that foundation, and then just ask them if they could follow up, put in a
yeah,
good word. And that way they're not spending quite as much capital to do that, and you've made it a fait accompli. They can't say no. They can't say, well, I kind of know where that foundation's head is right now. I just don't know. You know, all the kind of reasons people might give to kind of discourage you. So
You can also ask them, if they don't want to do the introduction for you, ask if you can use their name.
that's the other
I
thing.
was
That's
talking
right.
to so
Yep,
and so, and they said to reach out to you. That can be a good
exactly.
connection.
Yep, I love that as well. Great. Allison, James gave us creative ways to try to break through with foundations. What are some mistakes organizations make when trying to get their foot in the door with foundations? I know we've lived some of these ourselves.
Oh, yes. The most common by far that I've seen is lack of follow-up. So I'll be generous and say most organizations probably send a meeting request letter. They probably follow up once or twice, but then they leave it at that. They don't hear back and they treat the silence as a no.
And
I would,
you're saying one or two times following up is not
yep,
enough.
not at all. It takes 6 to 8 touches on average to get in front of a cold prospect.
Yeah.
Sometimes more, sometimes less.
I just
So,
wanted that. I want that to sit here for a second. I want us to kind of land on that. 6 to 8. Is it true? Have we had experience where following up a fourth or fifth or sixth time actually finally breaks the dam?
oh, I'll do you one better. I was just working with an organization who this was a very well aligned foundation. They were very confident that this was an issue that they cared about. And so they had been on the prospect list since day one. And we had reached out multiple times. They had a follow-up process that included 6 to 8 outreach attempts. We went through that process 3 or 4 times with no response. Tried reaching out to different folks. We tried mailing, we tried calling, nothing. After 18 months, we finally got a hold of one of their program officers who was like, you know what? I'm interested. Let's schedule a meeting. They had the
Wow.
meeting, requested a proposal, and it turned into a significant grant for their organization.
Wow. By the way, we don't make this stuff up. These are actual stories. I'll let you know if it's a fable ahead of time if you're listening here. That's a real story. And we get this kind of thing all the time. All the time, you know, I mean it's amazing. And sometimes people will even comment on the persistence that was shown, right? Like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know.
Absolutely. And the likelihood is that they're either not seeing your emails or they're not fully reading
Yeah.
them. So they're not just looking at it and saying no
Right.
again and again and again. They're probably just not seeing it.
We
Yeah.
always what's the word I'm looking for here? Think that the other side is paying more attention to what we're doing than they are. And so we think we're really bugging people when in fact we're just barely on their radar, if at all. So
Yeah.
I
it's
think
a great
it's
story, Allison. So
important.
besides lack of follow-up, what else I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's important to keep in mind that some of these foundations, especially the bigger professionally staffed ones, I mean, they're in the business of giving away money. So they are being inundated by people from all over asking them for meetings, proposals, whatever it is. So you can't assume that they've seen your outreach on the 6th, 8th time.
Right. That's a good point. Allison, okay, so not following up or not following up enough. And I think that's the most common thing, right? We think we followed up enough, but we
Yeah.
haven't. What else?
So it's in the same vein, but make sure you call. Don't just email and follow up over email. Call their foundation. Usually there's a phone number you can find on a website or in a 990 form. Call them and have a conversation. They're literally paid to answer the phone,
Yeah.
like Sean said. So pick up the phone.
Even if they're not staffed, this foundation was formed by a special, code and the special provision of our tax codes that allows money to be shifted from one pocket to another in a tax-free basis. Don't feel bad about making people potentially have a phone call with you. That's how I look at it anyway.
The other
Uh,
thing, if I could just piggyback on that real
yeah,
quick, because I think it's so important to call. And similarly, I have some clients who say to me, like, can I just email the LOI?
yeah,
And my answer is always no, right? You really want to get that thing in the mail,
yeah,
especially and maybe I should have mentioned this earlier when I was talking about creative ways to break through, but you slip a one pager in there, slip an annual
hmm
report in there,
hmm
something like that's coming in a bigger envelope. It's going to stand out and it should set your organization apart.
like that.
Even send a recent article you think they might be interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great one.
Send it
We
via
got
FedEx so it looks like something more official, not just another, whatever
Yep,
getting from everyone else.
yep. We got a private direct message here from the shadowy Cecilia Deem, who's sitting in the background here, director of the Center for Civil Society, and she notes she's worked with a number of donors, and the number one reason why they give when they choose not to fund a request is, quote, they never followed up, end quote. So that is a very relevant point, Cecilia. Thanks for bringing it up. Now we do have a guest here on Scotch Talk who does point out, and this is Nadine. You're not the only person to whom this has happened. I hope I could say your name. I realize now it's just the host and panelists, but anyway, that you called on the 990, the number on the 990, and the person who answered was angry because it was her personal phone number. Has that ever happened to anybody here among the panelists or people we've worked with? James?
Yes. Yeah, I've definitely had that happen. And I mean, look, it's to a certain extent, it's their own fault, right? They put
Yeah.
that number on the 990, but
Or
obviously
their
you're not-
attorney did, or their accountant did, or whomever. Yep.
Exactly, exactly. And of course, you're not going to say that to them. Like, well, then why'd you
Yeah.
put it on the 990? That's not how I typically handle it. What I usually do there is like, I'm really sorry to bother you on your personal line. I just noticed some of the giving you guys do, and I think you'd be really excited about the work we're doing. Is there a better number, phone number, address, or email address for me to reach you at? Be happy to send it there. And that's usually, smooths things over.
But you're gonna take some bullets in this business, though. I think you're just that's gonna happen. That is but it's a public document that they have to file. They put the phone number on there. It's not your fault that they put a phone number on there that they didn't like. But just be nice, backpedal, say, oh, I'm sorry. This is just what was on your the 990 that was publicly filed. Is there a better number? I was just trying to get in touch with the foundation, I think it's a way to handle that, but it shouldn't stop you from reaching out. Allison, was there any more common mistakes you wanted to note?
No, but just piggybacking on what James said, you can't be afraid of the no. The no's help you clarify who you should go after next. And you know what? If it's not a good fit, move on. There's plenty of foundations out there.
Right.
It's one less to call.
That's right.
Exactly.
So to our Canadian friends, I did note that we had some folks from Our Lady Seat of Wisdom and maybe other places in Canada. First of all, thank you for joining us. Second of all, I'm sorry that it's 74 degrees where I am right now in Phoenix, Arizona. I don't know what it might be where you are, but a good question. What is a 990? So in the United States, 501c3 organizations, charitable nonprofit organizations, have to file what's called a Form 990 every year. And it lists on their number of things. One is all the grants that they have received from foundations. It lists their top staff along with like salary information and some stuff like that. It lists their assets and their revenue and their expenses. Lots of really good information, and it's all available. What's a platform you all like to use most to look up 990s?
Foundation directory, ProPublica. There's so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an equivalent in Canada? We don't know. I'm sorry.
iWave
Teresa.
works in Canada, I think. So
What's that?
iWave, you might be able to.
Yeah, I think
there,
I wait
but-
for individuals. I'm not sure
Yeah.
about. Is there an equivalent form? Teresa, you tell us. The people who work with Our Lady Seat of Wisdom are not on this panel. Or may have Phil, they would know, I think. But I don't. I'm sorry, but hopefully that's helpful to you. If we're using any other lingo that you don't, please just speak up because we're in this business all the time. All right, Siobhan, I've decided it's worth it to apply to foundations. I got some creative ways to break through. I'm not going to make these common mistakes, but how can I find aligned, foundations that look like they would be good prospects for me? How do I go about finding those so I can do any of this stuff?
Yeah, great question. So I would first say, look within your own network. Look at your board members, as we talked about before. See if any of them are on foundation boards or otherwise connected to a foundation who you might be able to talk to. If you have any lapsed foundations, obviously talk to them. If you submitted proposals in the past that were rejected, maybe follow up on those, ask for a conversation, see if you can find out any more information. Also look through your direct mail donors. If you have any, you might have some family foundations hiding within there that you didn't know about. And maybe they gave you $500, but they could certainly give you a lot more if you were to properly cultivate them as a foundation. Beyond that, I think if your organization has any kind of a local focus, get out in your community, see who's funding local museums, things like that. A lot of them have donor walls and,
I'm
lists.
glad you mentioned that. I think this comes up on every Scotch talk. So I don't go anywhere if there's a donor wall where I don't take a photo of the donor wall.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't either. If you're on this call, I know it's going to look weird. It's going to kind of freak some people out sometimes, but like that could be very useful information for you. And so that's a great way to do guerrilla research.
And then, beyond that, if you're national or just looking for others, identify some like-minded organizations who you align with, who might have foundation donors that you could look at and get some ideas and names from there. Also, look at their 990s, see who's funding them, annual reports, anything like that. And just some good old-fashioned Googling of just different, foundation with certain keywords can actually bring up some different websites and, prospects you might not have otherwise thought of.
What are the absolutely necessary tools or platforms or programs, Siobhan, that you have to have to if we're going to be playing this game? And then are there any extra like on top, like that's really cool to have too, sorts of things?
Know that you really need.
You need foundation directory, right? Would you say that's absolutely
I would
necessary?
say
Maybe some way to look at a 990,
Yeah.
but really you can do that multiple places. Sorry, James, you were going to say something.
no,
Yeah.
no, no. I would agree. I mean, foundation directory, where you got to pay for foundation directory. ProPublica, you don't have to pay for, and it gives you all it has essentially every 990 the foundation directory has. The advantage that foundation directory has is the sorting.
Yeah, it's
right?
a search function. It just
Yeah.
makes it so much easier.
Yeah, you could go in, not knowing which foundation you're looking for in foundation directory and find some names to start looking through. Whereas you
And
can't-
it's all, you don't have to pay for any of that. You can just get it free online.
ProPublica, it's PRO, is it space or not space? PUBLICA. There you go.
They have a
Cecilia just put it in
nonprofit explorer function. That's what you gotta look for.
yeah, the shadowy Cecilia Deem just put that in the chat. Thank you. So yeah, I think so. And also comparable organizations' annual reports. Oftentimes people think they're givers in their annual reports. Their donor walls, foundation, all these public sources, 990s or the T3010, which I've now learned about in Canada. All those are ways basically to find prospects, looking in your own file. If you do a well screen on your file, doesn't that turn up?
Yeah,
any
Yes.
potential?
there's a column on there. It'll say connection to a foundation, yes or no. And that's actually a really good one to look at and then people to pursue from there.
What is how much does it cost to do a well screen typically? Like a
think
quarter a name?
Yeah, it's close to
for record.
25 cents a name.
So if you don't know what that is, we can talk more about that. If you do, then you do. Thank you, Cause IQ. That's great. Appreciate that. So there's lots of ways out there to start compiling a list and then keeping your eyes and ears open, basically, and continue to add to that list. So that's how you find them. James, sometimes though, in this process, you come across foundations, usually in foundation directory. I don't know if other sources say this as well. And there's a box checked basically, and it says it only gives this foundation, it only gives to pre-selected charitable organizations. And I haven't been pre-selected, so I guess I'm out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah, I have clients come to me all the time where they're looking at a 990 and they see that it's like section 14 of the 990 or something like that. There's a little box. Does this foundation only give to pre-selected charitable organizations? And it's checked on virtually every 990 out there.
Because if you're a foundation, you're in the business of trying to keep more people from applying to you. Right?
Yeah. And so I think that most of the time, the reason people check that box is out of ease, right? It's out of ease. It's to get maybe slightly fewer letters, that sort of thing. But my answer is just completely ignore that for the most part. I mean, if they have a process on their website, then you should follow that process on their website. But if they're a foundation and they exist out there and they have checked that box, ignore it and send them anyways. Because of course, the box itself begs the question, how does one get pre-selected, right? And you get pre-selected by sending them a letter, right? And asking them to be pre-selected. So
Yeah. So we just ignore it.
yeah.
Okay, great. Allison, you mentioned something earlier about a meeting request letter, and this has come up sometimes when we talk to clients, like, wait, so we should try to meet with the foundation? What if they have a process? What if their process is very well spelled out on their website? Is there any advantage to me trying to get a Zoom meeting or a phone or a personal meeting with the foundation?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, unless it's really spelled out of we don't even want to meet with you until we have an LOI, letter of inquiry, I'd say reach out, send them an email, see if they're willing to meet. It'll help you, one, clarify alignment, and two, then you could use that to customize your approach. So you're writing what they want to hear and making sure everything's very clear.
What would I be trying to what's my goal at that meeting? What kind of questions should I ask? By the way, Allison didn't know I was going to ask her any of these questions, so I'm really putting her on the spot here.
No, you're all good. I would ask about their giving priorities, ask what they're looking to fund, hear from them what they're passionate about, where are they looking to have impact in the next year. Two, I would ask if there's a giving range you should be knowledgeable of and considerate of. So then when you go to ask them for money and their first time grants are usually $10,000, you don't ask them for 100. Or if their normal first time grants are 100, you don't ask them for 10. So you can use that to clarify your approach.
Does
And
go both ways, right? Some foundations don't want to mess with smaller grants. Others don't. They might be offended if you ask for that much at the first time.
Yep, absolutely. I think just as importantly as you asking questions is letting them ask you questions.
Right. Of course.
Then they can clarify any
Yeah.
concerns or feedback they have.
Is one of the questions you should ask something along the lines of, do you like to fund kind of core programs, general operating, just
Absolutely.
the mission itself, or do you like to fund specific programs or initiatives?
Yep, absolutely. Know if you should approach with a general mission or if it should be a specific program. I would also, especially given the influx in portals in the last few years, I would ask what their process looks like. See if there's a portal you need to submit through, if you need to email it over, if you need to mail it over, or if you even need to fax it over. There's still a few that prefer that. So see what their process looks like.
Yep.
James.
Sorry, I was just going to tack onto that too.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, like when we're working with foundations, we can kind of get into this idea that it's all sort of it's like institutional fundraising, right? It's all bureaucratic and it's all a process and it's all asking the technical questions. But I think the other thing you got to remember here is like foundations are people too, right? There's real people making real decisions about your organization, so you need to speak to their identity, right? How they think about themselves and align sort of their way of thinking about their philanthropy with your mission. So I really encourage my clients to tell stories when they're in those meetings, right? It's a great opportunity to share sort of really impactful stories about your work.
Yeah, the framework that we use to think about fundraising applies almost just as well to foundations as it does to individuals, right, James? You're speaking out the language of belonging, identity, stories, relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think, yeah, just to reiterate my point, I think it's people get too focused on this institution with its systems and forget that one program officer is going to decide if they send your LOI or your proposal up to the executive director, who's going to decide as a person if it goes into the board book, to a set of people who are going to decide if they fund it, right? It's like yes, it's bureaucratic, but at the end of the day, there's still individuals.
And if you know those people and they know you, that doesn't hurt. Assuming you're some of the people like to know. I suppose it could hurt you. But even if sometimes what would happen with a good foundation, and there are some really good ones, you might get a call in that process like, hey, got a question for you on this. Didn't quite understand what you meant here. And I want to make sure we're making the best case possible for you. Oftentimes that's what they are doing. They're trying to help you make your case. So, and they can't do that if they don't know you, or they probably won't do that if they don't know you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why I mean I highly encourage people to meet with program officers and things of that sort, because they really are your advocate, right?
Yeah.
And you get to ask them all those questions. Sometimes they'll even review proposals for you before you actually submit them.
In fact,
Right?
you can ask them to do that. Hey,
Yes.
could I send you a draft of our proposal to get your feedback?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not everybody wants to do that, but some will.
And also
Absolutely.
ask them if they have a preferred length for what you're sending. You don't want to send a 10-page proposal if they really don't want to review anything that's over 3 pages.
Yeah.
So asking that up front is always a good idea.
Anything you can do to suck them into partnership with you in the process, really, right, is good. That's a great way to get your foot in the door. Siobhan, we have a question from a panelist I'm gonna let you answer. Do you start with a meeting request letter or do you start with an LOI?
Ooh, I mean, in some cases it could be the same thing, I would say, but I'd probably start with an LOI, get to talk about your organization. And then, if that doesn't go anywhere, you could move on to meeting requests. But I do see them as very similar. And maybe in your LOI, you ask for a meeting instead of opportunity to submit a proposal. So I would say they really go hand in hand rather than think of them as two separate things.
It's a good question. You can try to do both, but then you also don't want to confuse the recipient by having two calls to action rather than only one. I tend to think that personally, if you think a meeting's possible, especially if this is like a local thing, a regional thing, I think I might start with that. Am I wrong about that? And if you're in Pittsburgh and they're in LA, I think I'll just do the LOI because I'm probably not going to get to LA, assuming I don't travel to LA a whole lot. But I think if I'm local, I might switch it around.
It
Uh-huh.
usually just depends on their process. If they are very clear that they want an LOI first before they even talk to you, I do an LOI. But if you can get a meeting to then clarify your LOI even more, I would take that opportunity.
Yeah, and just to throw another wrench into the system here, if you know, let's say you have a connection to a program officer on staff or something like that, and they have an LOI form on their website. I've had clients meet with the program officer first, right before you even submit the LOI,
Mhm.
and that can be really helpful to sort of speed you through that process.
Well, that's clear as mud, Jen. I hope that's helpful. You definitely have to kind of exercise some prudential wisdom. I'd say the other factors are like, what kind of capacity do you have? I mean, you can't probably don't have the capacity to go meet 70 foundation representatives in 2025. So you maybe a bit of a pick and choose thing here. And I would say the better the prospect, the more I want to meet with them. If it's a long shot, I might just start with an LOI. That'd be another way I personally would probably think about
Yep.
breaking it down.
You can also send a bunch of meeting requests and see who responds. And if they don't respond, send an LOI.
Yeah. So many ways. So many ways. Hope that's helpful. Um, James, back to you. We kind of answered this a little bit before, but let's say you haven't had a chance to talk to a foundation. You've
Mhm.
tried, but you're struggling with this question of how much to ask for. Like, what should
Yeah.
my request be? And let's assume that they're incommunicado. Like, I can't get an answer from them. What do I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. So, yeah, assuming you can't get in touch with them and actually ask them how much to ask for, typically I'll go to that 990. I'll scroll down to the bottom to the section where they list all their grants. I'm going to kind of triangulate there and look, so what are the different sectors, right? Okay, there's some faith-based groups in here. There's some think tanks in here. There's a lot of local sort of places that are near their home. But they're, the faith-based stuff is really kind of the middle tier of giving. Let's say they're giving $10,000 to $50,000 to faith-based stuff, and the local stuff's getting a lot of 1 to 10, and the think tanks are getting a lot of 50 plus, right? Well, if I'm a religious group, I'm going to be square in that 10 to 50 range, and I'm probably going to, I might actually. So two things. One, I'm probably going to be at the bottom 25th percent of that is where my ask is going to be. So if they're 10 to 50, I'm going to ask somewhere between 10 to 25, something like that. 10 or excuse me, 10 to 20. The other thing you can do is go back a year in the 990 and see who's not on it, right? So they weren't on it in 2022, and all of a sudden they're on it in 2023 and they got 10K. Okay, then that gives you a kind of an idea, especially if it lists it as general operating support, not program specific, gives you an idea of where they like to start organizations.
Great. By the way, I just noticed we do have a couple questions in the Q&A feature, which I only now started to look at, even though I told you at the beginning that's the place to put your question. So I apologize. We will get to both of these good questions here in a second, so do not lose hope. Siobhan, uh, how can once I've moved on to a proposal, let's say, stage, um, are there non-annoying ways to make my proposal stand out from the crowd? Let's assume we're not in a portal situation, or maybe we are in a portal situation. I'm attaching something. I don't know, but what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I would say first and foremost, pay attention to the details. Make sure that you spell the foundation's name right. If you're addressing something to someone, spell the person's name right.
Yeah.
Don't just address something blanket to whom it may concern. Make sure you actually put in the work to find a name. So those are just really, it sounds silly and basic, but
But one of the details that
don't
is
matter.
easy to mess up, I think is really important is, do they capitalize the T and the before the name of the
Yeah.
foundation? Or do they refer to themselves as the RFI or RFI Foundation? Whatever. That's those things really, I think, do help you stand out. Like you've done a little bit
Absolutely.
of
They
work.
seem small, but really when you're reviewing hundreds, if not thousands of applications, those are probably little details that, oh, they got it right. Maybe they
Mhm.
care extra about this, things like that. So that's just one really easy way. Another, don't just talk about what you do, but really talk about how you want the foundation to come alongside you and be part of the impact. I've seen a lot of proposals that are 10 plus pages long and get really into the weeds about specific policy issues and exactly maybe how the organization's tackling it, but really doesn't say anything about the impact, right? I want to hear the stories about who that's affecting and the wins they've had, things like that. Don't make it so long that you've put every detail you can out there. Leave room for follow-up questions. I'd say that applies to a letter of inquiry. Say enough to pique their interest, but enough to have something to talk about in a follow-up conversation. Same goes for a proposal. You don't have to say every single thing about your work in there. And then the last thing, following up, as Allison talked about. Don't just send proposals out into the void and hope for the best, but follow up shows that you're serious. As Celia pointed out, that's often a common reason for not funding something. They want to know that there's a person behind those applications. And
How highly designed should the proposal be?
ooh, that's a controversial one.
It is controversial, yeah.
My opinion is don't design it. Put it on some letterhead and probably call it good, because I think the highly designed proposals, if I were on the other side, I'd think you're trying to make up for something, maybe a lack of substance in there if it looks like that. So I think, and a lot of times they're just maybe copying a section into a board book, things like that. So it probably won't maybe translate.
Well,
So I'm of the opinion
that's a really good point, that your highly designed thing may never even get seen by anybody because they're going to
right.
copy and paste out your summary into the board book. Yeah.
That's my
James,
opinion. I know others.
let's hear it. Let's hear it go around the horn on this
guys
one.
have-
I will disagree a little bit, at least insofar as if you have a highly designed brand, and especially if you are sending it to a foundation that doesn't have a portal, right? Or as a family foundation doesn't have staff, then I think it's probably a little bit more likely that they're going to actually look at the document. And I think it's going to be consistent with all the other stuff you put out. Now with that, your LOI needs to have some flair with it then as well, right? You don't want to send an LOI with just letterhead and then a proposal that's, glossy, sort of, bound in some special way, right? Like things like that. So I think if it's consistent with your brand, I think you should do that, because I do think the eye eats first. The other thing I would say is, oh shoot, what was I going to say about that? Well, I lost it, but Allison,
We'll come back to you if you get
Yeah.
that. Allison, you're going to break the tie.
I was gonna say I'm gonna go right in the middle. So I think there should be some design. Make sure you're using your brand fonts, your brand colors, use that as your section headers, but have your design in Word so that you can easily edit it. Don't have it so designed that you have to go to your designer in order to change the name of a foundation or the
That just slows down the whole outreach process, right?
Yep.
It's really annoying. We've all lived that.
Canva can be really great for this, by the way.
Yeah.
I have a couple different
Yeah.
clients that they do the design like in Adobe, and then they shift it into Canva, and so major gift can go in there and change.
That's
them.
nice. That's good. That's a solution right there. Solution to the question nobody asked except me, but I was interested in it. All right, Allison, we're gonna go back in time to the beginning of this whole deal. We have a question. It's a good question. We were talking about all the outreach attempts you're doing to try to break in. Do you direct them all to the same contact at a foundation, or do you spread them out? Are you trying different people along the way.
I'm going to challenge you in your persistence. The first 6 to 8, do it to the same person. If you don't hear back, maybe you go to the next person for your next 6 to 8.
That's great. And this is like forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7 sort of
Yes.
advice from Allison. And does a voicemail or other message count as an attempt?
I count it.
Oh, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Totally agree.
The other thing I would say is that, like, at least I used to advise clients not to leave a voicemail on the first call. So, like,
Mhm.
just give the ring, don't leave a voicemail. Second call, leave a voicemail. I've since changed that because I think just the influx of spam calls that we all get nowadays.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I leave a voicemail, right? Now you're a
Right.
known real human being.
Well, now they could potentially even pick up while you're leaving the voicemail now because it's being transcribed as you're leaving it.
100%.
Yeah.
True.
And that's different as well. Good point. Another question. Let's say Siobhan, when reaching out to small family foundations, are you starting your outreach with the executive director or the actual family?
Could be one and the same. If they're small enough, the family member might be the executive director in a lot of cases. So yeah, whoever that contact that you have is, probably they're a member of the family, but I would
But
say
let's say the family, there's an executive director who seems clearly not to be a member of the family. Should
yeah,
I
I mean, that's
go to the
fine.
ED
Yeah,
or should I go around him?
I think executive director is a good place to start. If you go around, you might not, your chances of hearing back aren't maybe as good, and you might get redirected to the executive director anyway. So if you find an executive director and you think they're not tied to the family, I would still start there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would start the executive director, but if I don't get anywhere or not hearing back, and if I have a line to the family, then I would pull that lever, I think, at some
100%.
point.
Yeah.
But first I'm gonna try to be respectful of the executive director and not sink myself with him or her. Any disagreements on that? Good question. All right. Allison, um, despite all of our perfect attempts, we got to know. We got to the proposal stage, and we got to know. We declined to fund you. We wish you all the best. You're a very important mission, and good luck. What do we do now?
I would treat it as a not yet. Don't treat it as a never and mark them off. So unless the foundation is very clear in their no that your work does not align with our mission and we never want to hear from you ever again. Use that as a chance to follow up, ask for a meeting. I'm going to hammer the reaching out and asking for a meeting. But use that as an opportunity to get their feedback. Ask what resonated with you, what concerns did you have, hear where their interests are, and then ask if you can submit again in the next year.
Absolutely. And just for the record, I've only ever seen a foundation give as like a hard enough no that I thought I'm never going to reach out to them again. One time. That's the only time I've ever seen it. And it was a formal letter, and it was, all sorts of very clear. But I've only ever seen that happen once. So just to
If the
emphasize,
attorneys write the letter,
yeah,
if it does say the word cease and desist anywhere in it, I think we can take that as a real no. Otherwise, yeah, that's right. It's a not yet. I think that's exactly right. And Allison, back to you. Let's say the opposite. You received a grant. Okay. What's next? What now?
Treat them like you would a major donor. I mean, the first thing you should do is thank them. Whoever you've been in contact with, send them an email really quickly and say, thanks so much. We just received news. Really appreciate all your help along the way. And then also throw a thank you note in the mail. It takes 2 minutes and it's such a personal touch, and it will make you stand out, especially when you're going to go back next year and ask for a renewal or likely even more money. And then after that, make sure you review the grant agreement. I cannot emphasize that enough. Look through it, make sure see if there's any deadlines for reports, and note them and set reminders, because unless there's a portal that's going to send you an automated reminder, you're responsible for sending those
It
reports.
is amazing. If you sit around foundation people for a while, like some of us have, the shadowy Cecilia team has, and I do now sometimes too. It's like it is one of the main things they talk. It's like it is an incredibly high percentage of their grantees do not submit their grant reports at the agreed upon times. You can stand out simply by doing the very simple reports often, not always. I mean, I know the Gates reports is going to be harder than most, right? Or the Walton report, but many times it's very simple. Or they don't even call like, hey, if you would just call up the program officer and say, we're going to be a little late. We're working through this huge event right now, and I can't get the data I need. Can we if we're 2 weeks late on our grant report, is that cool? You know, because most of the time you're going to get a, of course, that's no problem at all. Um, but it's amazing that people don't. Anyway, that's just a little. You can stand out by just doing the reports.
The report that they've asked you to do and you've
Yeah,
agreed to do.
and you agreed to. Also by spending the money the way you said you would do it. And if you don't, by letting the foundation know or getting their consent to not doing that. It's very, very important. Siobhan, what's the kind of timeline we're talking about in terms of getting in the door from the moment I first reach out until I get a uh how should I put this? Till I get even a let's say an invitation to submit a proposal. What kind of timeline typically would we be looking at?
Depends. I mean, I would say at least probably could be up to 6 months. And, even like reach out to getting a grant is probably 12 to 18 months. It's a long-term play. I think a lot of times people want that quick hit, but that's not the case with foundations. It takes consistency, and a long term view of it, because you might reach out and maybe you just missed their most recent deadline and you might have to wait another quarter or even year. You might have reached them toward the end of the year and they say they've already committed all of their funds for the year, so you might need to follow up again in the new year. Things like that just can really slow the process down.
And James, what ratio of success should I expect in terms of just getting in the door with
Yeah.
cold prospects?
Cold prospects, typically what I say is like somewhere between 25 and 35% of your LOIs are going to turn into proposal requests.
So about a third.
Yeah. And then, on the low side of a third.
Right.
And then on the, and then as far as proposals to grants, that I would say it varies so much because it depends on the actual relationship with the foundation. If you have a strong relationship with the foundation, if the program officer calls you and says, hey, this one thing was unclear, you're probably looking at like a 50% shot, right? Maybe higher. I don't like to set it higher than 50%. It makes me nervous.
Yeah. Right.
But you're somewhere probably in the same range of 25 to 30 on the whole. But I think that, if you can establish that relationship, you got a lot better shot. If you're totally cold, then you've never talked to them, they never talked to you, 5, 10%, 15%, it can be tough.
All of which tells us that we've got a numbers game in front of us, right?
100%. Yeah. Most of my clients, maybe you're raising over $4 million a year. Well, and let me even say this. If you have someone on staff who owns foundations, right, it is their responsibility to do foundations, I would probably send, if you're a national organization, I'd probably send at least 100 LOIs a year.
Yeah.
Minimum.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's great. It was very similar to like the number of meetings you'd want to do as a major gift officer.
100%. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's add one more thing in terms of getting in the door. And then I'm pretty much out of questions. So if we don't get any more questions from the crowd here, we'll end after this. All the things we talked about, but one of the things that is a strategy, but and people sometimes just do it naturally, but don't think about it as a strategy, is a really great way to connect with someone at a foundation is to bump into them somewhere. Bump into them, and so you got to put yourself in position where bump intos happen, which means you have to leave the office. You have to go to events, you have to go to talks, you have to go to um all sorts of different gatherings where you might bump into people, whether that's in your community. There's a very famous coffee shop here in the community in Phoenix where A couple of the people on here from St. Vincent de Paul, Phoenix would know exactly what I'm talking about, and that's a great bump into place. The bump into is a lovely way to connect with somebody, either for the first time or in the second, third, or fourth time. So, but you can't plan a bump into. It's got to happen, which means you have to put yourself in a position for the bump into. So I would really just make sure people are thinking, you got it, Belle. Belle nailed it in the chat. Um, you got to put yourself in those kinds of positions. Even just working foundations as much as if you're working major gifts, it seems to me, because it's all about some FaceTime. So, oh, this person, oop, oh, I haven't returned to your call, your email or whatever, and now they're going to, right? Um, or oh, I was going to call you, or it's nice to meet you. I'd love, yeah, please do go ahead, send me a letter of inquiry. They're happy to do that. That's You never know what can happen. But you have to put yourself in a position for that to happen. So, and that can happen nationally, it can happen locally, what have you. All right. Any final words? We'll go around the room here. Thank you for the temperature update in Fahrenheit. We appreciate that, Teresa. We have no idea how to convert that to Celsius. I think that's, I don't know, negative 14 or something Celsius. I have no idea. Um, Allison, final words here on how to get in the door um, and successfully engage foundation prospects.
Be persistent and make sure your foundations feel like they're as much part of your mission as your major donors are, because they are as much part of your mission.
Excellent. James?
Yeah, I would say it's really about don't underestimate the relationship and story aspect of what you're doing, even in your follow-up, right? Drop a one pager in an email you send them, share a link to a story about your organization, whatever it may be, right? It's not all hard, just push. We could push with some sort of humanity, some content even. But
Right. I like that. I like the stories. We didn't linger as much on that, but stories about those you help, personal, individual, compelling stories. Shafam?
Put yourself out there. Getting a LOI or proposal out the door is better than waiting until you have the perfect design or the right story or whatever it is. Also, don't stress too much about ask amount. I think this is somewhere that people get really hung up, and ultimately the foundation's probably going to give what they want to anyway. So if you ask for 50,000 and their max is 20, they'll probably give you the 20 anyway. I mean, don't ask for $1 million when they only give $10,000 grants, and don't be crazy about it. But it's not rocket science. And if you feel like you need 50,000, ask for that, and we'll see what they give you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, James, Allison, and Siobhan, for being on this panel today. Thank you all who attended live. We really appreciate it from Santa Fe to Florida to Ohio to Ontario. We had our bases covered here today geographically. Wish everybody a happy Advent and a Merry Christmas. And if you have any further questions for us, you can reach out. Frankly, just reach out right to me, jbeer@amphil.com. And happy to direct you to resources we have or get your questions answered. So thank you so much, and we'll see you down the line. Appreciate it.